All right, so the next step will be installing the L2 RX shifters on the bar. So the updated version, I think for whatever the winter, fall 2022, 2023, is the shifter. Paddle's a bit bigger, apparently over previous designs from what I've seen online. On the bars, it feels nice. On its own, it feels very hard to shift, but once it's on, perfect. The only downside, and I've seen it in another video, is the tightening bolt is super hard to reach. So for this, again, you're always worried you're going to rip the rubber. I don't know whether it's a valid concern or not. But having the rounded, where did I put it? Rounded Allen keys. I've for many years used cheaper Allen keys. I bought a set of, or got a set as a gift, where Allen keys, so much better. So with these, you can sort of jam it in, feel the click that it's in place, loosen it right off. Again, you can look on the inside to make sure you're not, you might as well go all the way loose without pulling the bolt out. And I just did just that. All right, so it's loose. Slide it onto the bars. So you want it about the right height, but to set up the actual brake hose, it helps to start by having it sort of tilted outward so that it's more of a direct angle for the hydraulic hose into the shifter. So again, we want high enough on the bars so we can cut the cable the right length, and then we'll just get it hand tight here. Because it's such a big bolt, normally the rounded head, you're worried about if you torque it, you could strip it. If you had lower end Allen keys where it's maybe not built to a tight of a tolerance, I'd certainly be more worried about doing this and tightening it tight. But these are super well built. You can just feel a solid contact, and because it is a bigger head, it does seem to be okay. So I definitely make that recommendation. Fortunately, like $60 Canadian, so they're definitely way more expensive than something you'd get at just a hardware store. But worth it, because if you strip bolts, that's a headache. And it can be expensive. All right, other side. Obviously, there's a front and a rear. Thumb shifters go into the middle, easy enough. And again, I'll just look across, make sure the heights are about the same, and I'll angle it outwards so I can set up the hydraulic hose. The other thing that scared me a few times is you hear a little click as the mount sort of goes into the frame. If you know you're not super tight yet, be assured, but if you're really cranking it, that click might not be the click you want. All right, so just like that, we now have everything ready to finish. Just getting the cables where they need to be and routing them through. Okay, so now we're going to hook up the brake hoses. So what you're going to want is, these are mineral oil, so water soluble, damp cloth in case you drip some, probably some. I've got a little container at the bottom in case I drip there. You'll need 8 mil and 10 mil little wrenches, something to cut the cable with, as well as ideally a tool to push the pin in. Pretty much same setup as the Shimano hydraulic. So you could hammer it in, but this is certainly way easier and you can get them cheap enough off Amazon. The cutter is basically just a razor blade with a cool handle, so you don't necessarily need it, but it's also a cheap tool to grab. So what we're going to do is also from your parts bag, I'll have a picture. With the L2 is you'll need 3 different things for each brake setup. You'll need your nut, the pin that you'll push in, and your barb. So again, if you've done Shimano hydraulic, it's the exact same setup. So this is where it gets a little nerve-wracking because you want to make sure the cables are the right length, otherwise you have to do a lot. So I recently traveled with a bike and it had internal routing, so I had this problem. If your cables are too short, it becomes very hard to get the stem off the steer tube, especially with the front brake, unless you want to start unhooking everything. So what I've learned from that is when you're going to set it up, is try to push the cable back in to give you as much slack as you can. And then next you want to figure out how long does the cable have to be. So then you basically want to route it as if you were going to set it up on the bike. Like that. And then figure out where you're going to want to cut the cable. So the cable needs to go in a decent amount to this, the end part. This comes out, it actually goes into here, and you can kind of see where it needs to go. So about there. Again, you can only really do this once, otherwise you need more hardware to redo it. It's not as forgiving as a wired setup. So let's make sure. See about there. So you can set everything up and then do this later because the end is sealed, so it's not too much of a problem. So yeah, I've got my length set up. You also want to make sure you've got the front and back sorted out. North America, so we're doing front brake, what will be my right, but left on the actual bike. So put my trusty cutter tool on, snip it off, and then I guess get rid of that. Then we need to insert some stuff onto the cable, so start with the screw-in. Definitely make sure you get this on. I saw another video where they pushed the pin in and then put the barb on. They had troubles getting the barb on, so I actually find it's better to put it on first and it just goes on easy. If you put it on first, once you put the pin in, it causes the cable to expand slightly, which is maybe why they had some troubles getting it on, but put it on first, easy peasy. Again, you want to make sure, just like the cables, it's clean so that looks nice and open. Start the pin just with your finger. And this is where you might want to hammer it. Another good thing to note here is I did say as you push the pin in, the hose expands. So you want to make sure this tool clamps the hose down. But if you're clamped on where the pin is actually going to go in, it's going to make it harder to go in. So you want to make sure you've inserted enough hose so you're not sort of in that pin zone. Again, you want this nice and tight. And then we'll just push it in. If you don't tighten it enough here, then the cable just goes out with the pin. So yeah, again, always make sure you've got all 3 things. Perfect. And that's on. Loosen it right off so it's ready for the next brake back. Okay, so then now that we're ready, we take this as just a cover cap. Get it. Screws normally. Comes off, don't need it, gone. All right, so now we want the cable routed the way we want it. Make sure the barb comes to the end, and we also need the screw. So this is where it can be tricky just getting the lineup to get the first threads in. You don't want it to start with the threads in the wrong spot. So definitely just start with your hands. Sometimes it helps to sort of reverse thread it. Then you'll feel like a little click that lets you know the threads are aligned, and then you can start going forwards. So you can start while it's light with just the 8. All right, once it's hand tight like that, this is where you get out your 10 mil, and you put the 10 mil on the part here, and then you tighten with the 8. So here you need to go pretty tight. You're crushing that barb so that nothing comes out. It squeezes it all together. Oops. Perfect. All right, front cable setup. Exact same process for the back. Just give it a wipe down just in case. So as you can see, I barely cut anything off. I mentioned at the beginning, front cable is pretty short. I don't have a lot of spacers. I do have like a 120 stem, but that's all that came off. So if you know you got a really high stack or a huge frame with the L2, you might need to be prepared to buy extra mineral oil hydraulic cabling. Go quickly through the back one. So much more to play with here. Same thing, slide these on. Remember, we have to screw this in, so threads on the outside. This one feels a little tighter. A little bit further back. Barb next. Just squish it on. Wow. That went in, didn't even have to touch anything. Probably not great, but right. It's all together. Cut. So we'll start again. Remove the cap. Put it in the trusted container. And route it the way you're going to want to route it. Here. All set up. Maybe a bit long, but
That'll work.
Next up will be derailleur cables.